one parent who always met our teachers to find out how we were doing, to make sure that she was keen to get her daughters educated.
The way women were treated, how did that affect that decision?
Yes, the most important thing is to prepare your case thoroughly, get instructions thoroughly, and then you'll be able to meet with the questions in court.
That early career, learning how to deal with people, learning patience, even in the face of magistrates or clients who didn't believe in you initially, being prepared, that got you ready for the next thing that I really want to talk about as well, which was being the first woman on the High Court of Zambia. How did that happen? And what was the challenge you faced? Because you were there for 2.5 years before another woman came. And I also want you to talk to me about the facilities.
Yes. When I completed my service at the legal aid department, the Chief Justice one day called me and told me that the government has decided that I should be appointed to the High Court bench. It took me off my chair. It just came out like that. And I said to the Chief Justice, oh no, not me. There are senior lawyers, and I was looking at the men who were senior to me and saying, how come that one or that one is not on the bench? How am I going to cope? And by then, my children were younger. So I told the Chief Justice, no, I don't think I'll manage. And I was expecting my third child at that time. So I told the Chief Justice, this is my situation, and I don't think I'll cope. So the Chief Justice then said, oh no, we'll wait for you until your baby is born, and then we'll go ahead with the formal appointment. And that's what happened. They waited for me to give birth to my third child and go through maternity leave, and the appointment came. Yes.
The appointment came. And so what was it like when you first put that robe on? You know, what was your confidence level then?
I was still not sure of myself. And the first time I put on the robe, it was so cumbersome because it was the first time for me to wear like a uniform. And these were the old British robes, which we still use them in Zambia today. And you have this belt, which is thick, and the other tying, and the bibs, and oh, it was so cumbersome. But at that time, they would send a female police officer to assist me to dress properly. And the very first time I wore it, it was a bit heavy, but I said, okay, I have to get used to it. And then I started working as a judge. Again, there I found challenges because some of the older lawyers were not ready for me. But I plodded on. Again, the same principle, prepare your cases, make sure you know what you're going to do when you go in court. And then during trials, during my first few trials, the senior lawyers would be like testing me. Yeah, being a woman, they didn't think I knew a lot and things like that. But yeah, I worked hard. I had to work twice as much, even harder than legal aid was, because the High Court had much more serious cases, and many more of the lawyers who were appearing were very senior lawyers. So it was quite a challenge for me.
But you also found support from some of your fellow brothers on the bench, true?
Yes, yes. They were, I remember very, very well. There were two who were very supportive. And they always looked after me like their young sister. And they would explain. Sometimes I would also go to them if I was facing a problem. And they were always willing and ready to help me. But only 2 out of the 9 others, judges, who some of whom didn't even want to talk to me because they thought I was too low a level and things like that. But then, yeah, I learned to be polite and to know my place, but always get ready with my work.
And so you built, as there on the court, the importance of allies, finding
Yes.
those that can support you.
Yes.
Is so important in the course of your career. I wanted you to comment on facilities, though, because when you joined, there weren't facilities for women in the courthouse, right?
No, it was quite funny. When I went there, even things like toilet rooms, there were common toilet rooms for the rest of the workers. And yet, for the male judges, they had their own toilet facilities for judges only. So when I went there, I asked the registrar, what about me? I'm now here. What am I going to use? At first, he just dismissed me. So I went to the Chief Justice and explained, this is the situation. It was a bit embarrassing, but I said that I'm here and they just have to deal with me and accept me as I am. And so they had to find, to turn one of the common toilet facilities into a women judges only facility. And that's how it was. It wasn't easy to convince even the Chief Justice that it was important for me to have that facility because the male judges had their own facility. So at one time, the Chief Justice commented and said, oh, he said, oh, I didn't know that appointing women to the bench would bring extra problems. I just laughed it off. Yeah, I just laughed it off.
And that sense of humor throughout your life, you know, when women are facing very, very difficult challenges, you have been very strategic in how you get people to see your point of view and to use humor as a way to move things forward.
Yes, yes. I always had to calculate that. And I thank my abilities as a lawyer because even when I was defending some of my clients, I had to think ahead and strategize. So when it came to facilities for myself and how I was going to maneuver through the work with male colleagues who were not that friendly and male colleagues who accommodated me, I had to strategize. I knew when to speak, when to argue, when to put my point forward, and when to remain silent. Because
and that's for women. Women, to me, we've always had to be strategic. We've always had to live in dual worlds and develop those skills that can help us move forward with any agenda. And I mentioned we were going to focus on the High Court. You were there for 8 years. And then you left the bench and went to the Office of Ombudsman, which was investigating the government, investigating government agencies. Why did you make that change?
It was the judiciary at the time when the second ombudsman decided to leave and go back to the bench. So the Chief Justice asked me whether I would like to go to the Investigator General's office because the conditions of service were the same as Supreme Court judges because I was ready for promotion then. So I agreed because to me, I thought, oh, let me have a different office. It's like a fresh breath of fresh air. And that's how I accepted that office. And I was appointed as the first woman to occupy that office. It was a very interesting office, a very different angle of dealing with people and government officials.
How so?
That was an office where people who had complaints against government officials or government officers would come and lay their complaints before the Commissioner for Investigations. And it was a collegiate body. So it was myself as chairperson, Investigator General, and I had 3 commissioners. These were lay people. So we'd sit together as a commission. So people from all walks of life, office orderlies, ordinary members of the public, not necessarily civil servants who didn't receive the service they expected to receive from the government, and mostly other civil servants, teachers, policemen, all sorts of people who had complaints against the way they were treated or the type of services they received from government. And it was an interesting office because we used to work in camera. We would conduct our investigations in camera. We would summon witnesses, we would compel production of documents so that we completed the investigation in camera, and then we would file a report to the president, the head of state, for him to see, and we would make recommendations. Now, what was important in that respect was that it didn't matter what level of a complainant we received. If we had to summon a cabinet minister, we did so. if we had to summon a permanent secretary, whoever, even at the State House, at the president's office, sometimes complaints came from there, and would summon even the minister in the president's office to come and give evidence as to what would happen, and then we would look for, we would sort it out and make recommendations. Sometimes we were able to simply make recommendations to the senior officer without reporting to the president. And then the senior officer, if they accepted our recommendations, they would solve it that way. Because the idea was that a government office or a parastatal office should all the time give adequate service to the people and also listen to their complaints and deal with them. So we always encouraged people, first complain to your boss and see whether your boss can deal with it. When you go through the chain of administration, if you are not satisfied, then you come to the Commission for Investigations. So it was enriching in that respect.
And I noticed too, in your career, when you talked about those you represented in prison, or the women you represented, or when you were on the high court, the importance of fairness and working hard, and now here you come to this position, your humility really shines through. Like even when you were wearing that heavy black robe, you never forgot that you were just like everyone else. How is it that you did not get what some people call judgeitis, or carry yourself because you were in such an important position that you could remember and keep in mind the people? How did you hold on to that?
Because from an early age, when I started interacting with people, either as accused persons or convicted people or just ordinary litigants, I learned the strategy of placing myself at their level so that they could understand me and they could gain confidence and know that I was listening to them and I was at their level, understanding their problem. So when I went to the Commission for Investigations, it was the same approach. We are listening to you. We understand what your problem is. And in complaints where we found out that they were not justified, we would call the complainant and explain to them so that they don't feel that we just didn't care or we just didn't want to summon some senior officials. We would explain to them the procedure and we would explain to them what the commission was able to do and not able to do. Because I felt that it was important for people to understand what the government is there for, what the government can do and what the government cannot do, and what their role as individuals, whether as workers in government or ordinary people facing government, what their role was and how they would enjoy the services or feel confident that they can be listened to when they need to be listened to.
And in addition to doing this in your role as ombudsman and the first woman to be investigator general, you also branched out and you worked as a commissioner of the International Commissioners Jurist. You were at one time working on the protocol for the African Charter on Human and People's Rights to establish the Court of Justice for Africa. You served on the UN Commission on the Status of Women. Why was it so important for you or to you to get involved in that way?
I felt that, first of all, these were offices where the government nominated me, used to nominate me for those positions. And I felt that it was important for me to understand those problems, especially of women, when I was on the commission on the UN Commission on the Status of Women, to understand them from a global point of view, and also to learn from colleagues from other countries, their approach to similar problems. And what was important also in that, when I was sitting on the commission on the UN Commission on the Status of Women, was to learn that governments were actually obliged to set standards to improve the status of women in their countries. And I was overjoyed because I thought that, oh, so in Zambia, it's not only the NGOs or the political parties who have to push government. The United Nations itself had all these protocols for our government to adhere to. So I was always reporting to the government, this is where Zambia is, this is how far Zambia is, and this is where we ought to be as a member state of the United Nations. So I learned quite a lot also, but I also got more encouraged that actually, as a state, Zambia is obliged to raise the status of women and also to deal with customary practices which were harmful to women, because the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women was key, especially against traditions which were harmful to women. So being one of them at that level, at the UN level, then I would join the women organizations at national level. And we worked very well, we moved forward. And our government was receptive. They were able to change the law regarding especially maternity leave, and also give us all the terms and conditions of service as women, not looking at what the spouse was doing or what facilities the spouse had. We fought for employees' terms and conditions of service as individual women. So the government was receptive, and I was happy that at least we improved the status of women along those lines, though we still had a lot to be done, even today.
The other thing I noticed about you is you always say yes to the Chief Justice, to the government, for all these positions. I like to think of you as a yes woman. And one of the other things that was so important to you on that commission was establishing that rape became a war crime. You were one of the most vocal to emphasize that and how critical that was, that rape should be a crime.
Yes, when I was sitting on that commission and the war in the former Yugoslavia was going on, as well as in Rwanda, I had handled rape cases when I was at the Department of Legal Aid and when I was at High Court level. So I knew how devastating rape is to women victims. Mostly the victims were women at that time. So yes, I was vocal so that we could get the General Assembly to accept that rape should be treated as a crime in its own, with its own definition as a war crime when it happens during conflict, international wars, or civil wars. So we worked very hard alongside other lawyers who were in the commission, and we were happy that the UN accepted and passed a resolution to have rape as a war crime or as a crime against humanity, depending on how it happened. So that way I felt that at least, even in times of war, women can be protected if the laws of war are complied with.
And so these other appointments that you accepted them and you were still raising your family, 4 children. How were you able to balance and juggle all of that?
Fortunately, in Zambia, even today, we have support systems within families. We have extended families. So part of the time when my children were young, for instance, my first child, some of the time, I would take him to my aunt-in-law, my husband's aunt, and they would look after him. When I couldn't afford to get a nanny who could look after my children, or I could get a niece from either part of the family to come and stay with us and look after the children. Some other times when I was able to get a nanny, I would employ one, and then somebody would look after the children. And also, I was fortunate in the sense that my husband was very much hands-on. So whenever I had to travel out of station or even travel out of the country, he would remain at home. He was also working, but he would make sure that he was always home and pay attention to the children. So that helped me a lot to go on with my career.
So you had a village to help raise your children, and I guess you would say you have to marry well. You have to marry the right man if you want to carry on in your career. I know that certainly was the case with me as well. I want to turn now, because of course all of this to me prepared you for the next giant step you took to the international courts. I want to talk about those appointments.
On getting the evidence that was required for the cases or for the convictions that you needed to register.
Very, very tough cases to hear and to work through, and very complicated.
It gave more meaning to the phrase "power to the people."